The wind blew down the broken streets of Tarn Velt, scraping dust through the air like whispers of an old war, and Dren walked with his coat too thin and his boots too cracked to be anything but honest. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, where only one coin remained warm from his touch and heavy with decision, as he reached the plaza where the scrap market rattled and sang its metal song. There she sat low on the corner, back against a rusted light pole wrapped in brown cloth so stained it might once have been something else. She held out a chipped cup. Her fingers were not human, not quite. They were jointed strangely, her skin too smooth, too pale, with that slight glimmer that gave her away as offworlder, a beggar, alien, and invisible to most. But not to Dren, who paused, looked into her eyes behind the shadow of the hood, and without speaking, dropped his last coin into her cup. And her hand closed around it fast and silent, like a trap closing, not in violence, but in urgency. And then she stood taller than he expected, taller than her crouch implied, and with one deliberate movement pulled back her hood, revealing eyes that shimmered violet and silver, and a face that did not belong on a street corner in the dust of Tarn Velt. The plaza seemed to hold its breath as she stepped forward, her voice a slow ripple across his skin. "You know not what you have done," she said, and Dren felt every word sink into the parts of him that still hoped, still dreamed. Her name, she said, was Aris Valentha, daughter of the stars, warden of the line, and she had not spoken it aloud for 200 cycles. She had been cast down, hidden among the forgotten worlds, seeking the last kindness that would mark the return. And he had given it to her, a coin, not forged in any royal mint, but earned through calloused labor and silent compassion. And she touched his forehead with one long finger, and whispered words that burned in his bones. And Dren dropped to his knees, not from pain, but from something heavier, older, deeper. And the sky cracked above them, a line of white light, opening the clouds like a page being turned. And she said the watchers had seen the coin had tipped the scale, and she would call the old blood to rise. Ships that had not moved in a century, powered by will and woven crystal, stirred beneath the forgotten sands of Elo's prime. Ships whose names were etched in the roots of the galaxy began to hum and glow as command beacons reawakened. Aris Valentha called, not with weapons, but with memory and fire. And Dren stood beside her as if the plaza had not changed, though it had. For every watcher in orbit, every sleeper cell, every enemy of the throne and friend of the flame, now knew she lived and had been found by a human, a coin given in mercy, now a banner of war. And Dren asked her softly, "What happens now?" And she said, "You walk beside me, and history walks behind us." And they left the plaza with the dust still swirling. But now something followed them, the sound of drums in the far distance, and the slow awakening of a galaxy that had not known peace since she vanished. In the dark system of Val Turn, a throne stood on obsidian stone under a sky that wept ash and black flame. It had been empty since Aris was betrayed by her bloodkin, since the siblings were tore light from time, and now those who claimed it in her absence felt the shift as if the weight of justice, once forgotten, now loomed heavy and sharp. The councils whispered, the warlords assembled, the oracles wept for their visions, and in a chamber of secrets the sovereign triune demanded to know how a beggar in exile could rise again. And the answer came in the form of a human name. Dren of Tarn Velt, a nobody with no bloodlines, no legacy, no army. And yet his choice had pulled the thread, and the tapestry was unraveling. And even the traitor known as Vale Ashbourne felt his grip slip as old oaths stirred, and the throne began to burn, not in fire, but in demand, calling for its rightful heir, calling for Aris Valentha. With the voice of the stars, they traveled not by ship, but by the ancient paths that only the wardens knew, steps carved in the skin of space itself. And Dren walked them beside Aris, through caverns of light, through silence so deep it spoke. And in that journey she taught him not with words, but with presence, how to hold power, how to wield history, how to speak in a tongue that only fire and memory understood. And when they came to the Hall of Echoes, the place where the vows of old were buried in glass, he did not falter when the ancestors demanded price and truth for the right to walk forward. He gave both, and Aris watched and did not speak, for what he gave was not heritage or crown but something rarer, conviction untouched by power. And the hall opened, not for her, but for him, for the one who gave freely and asked nothing, and in doing so became more than companion, more than catalyst. He became her oath-bearer, the first in 7 ages. News moved faster than light when it came with meaning, and the return of Aris was more than news. It was a myth becoming real, and every faction, every world, every shadowed order turned toward her, some in awe, some in fear, and many in fury. And the Ash Fleet moved not to attack, but to reclaim, drifting like smoke through space, igniting sparks in old hearts, and Dren now wore the mantle, not of prince, but of witness. And the galaxy looked at him and asked, why him? Why this human? And the answer was simple: because he gave without knowing what it meant, and because he asked nothing in return, and the armies that rose against them were not enough to stop the weight of destiny when it arrives on footsteps of the forgotten, and in the quiet before the storm. Dren held her hand and said, I will follow you through fire. And Aris smiled and said, no, the fire follows you. They landed where the throne wept, and ash fell in sheets over black stone, and the sky cracked with stormlight. Aris walked forward alone, but not alone, for Dren stood behind her, and the Ash Fleet shadowed the heavens, and the traitors assembled in their final circle, cloaked in law and lies, and asked her to kneel, to beg to prove her worth. And she laughed once, a sound that made the mountains tremble, and she said, the one who has nothing to prove has nothing to lose. And she walked past them and touched the throne. And it bloomed, not in flowers, but in flame, in crystal, in memory. And the names of the fallen rose in a spiral of light, and those who watched dropped their weapons, and those who resisted burned in silence, not by her hand, but by their own oaths breaking. And Dren stepped to her side and said, is this how history changes? And she said, no, this is how it remembers. Years passed, and the galaxy rebuilt, not in her image, but in the echo of her mercy, and Dren became a legend, not for battle, not for conquest, but for a moment, for a coin given to someone everyone else ignored. And that coin now rested in the Hall of Light, a symbol not of wealth, but of worth. And children learned of it before they could speak, and starships bore its image. And Aris ruled not from fear, but from remembrance. And every year on the day they met, she returned to Tarn Velt, not in procession, but in silence, cloaked again, sitting on the same corner. And always someone passed and gave her something: food, water, words, but none gave their last coin. Not until a child, born of 2 worlds, stopped, and without hesitation offered her a gear-shaped token carved by hand. And she smiled and said softly, again and again, we begin again.